I nearly died from hypothermia after they left me naked for days in an abandoned lighthouse until tourists found me.
My name is Maren Dahl. I'm 32 years old. I was in escort work for a little over 3 years. Before any of that, I was just this quiet girl who never really figured out how to be around people. I grew up on a tiny island off the coast of Norway. My parents were ornithologists. They studied birds almost year-round, so our whole life was rocks and wind and long stretches of silence. I didn't have other kids around. Most days it was just me, the cliffs, and whatever book I was reading that week. I'd climb around for hours, sit on the same ledge watching the water, and somehow that felt normal. The sea was always moving, but it never felt loud the way cities do. I could be alone without feeling lonely, if that makes sense. There was this old fisherman who lived a little ways down the shore. He'd let me sit in his boat while he fixed nets. He taught me how to read the water, when the waves meant the weather was turning, how the color changed before a storm. I trusted him more than almost anyone. He never asked me a bunch of questions or tried to fill the quiet. He'd just nod and keep working. Those afternoons felt solid, like I had a place. Then my mom got really sick when I was 15. We had to leave the island for good and move to the mainland. Just like that, the whole life I'd known was gone. The island stayed behind, the rocks, the wind, that specific kind of silence. I never got them back. I still feel it sometimes, that hole where home used to be. The city was everything the island wasn't. Too many voices, too many lights, too much movement. I walked around feeling like I was made of the wrong material. By the time I was 18, I still daydreamed about going back. Not in a dramatic way, just this quiet wanting. Live small, be near the water, not have to perform for anyone. But the island wasn't an option anymore. My parents' research had kept us there for years, and once we left, that chapter closed. I didn't know then that my dad had been hiding something big, that a lot of the funding for their work came from the military. He never talked about it. Looking back, maybe that secrecy was already in the air of our house, this low-level tension I couldn't name. I ended up in Oslo studying biology. It made sense on paper. Birds, ecosystems, the natural world, stuff I'd grown up around. But sitting in lecture halls full of people who seemed to know how to talk and laugh and belong, I felt like a stranger. I'd show up, take notes, leave. Most nights, I worked the late shift at the university library. It was quiet there after 10. I liked the rows of books, the soft lamps, the way the building emptied out. I'd reshelve things and listen to the heating system click. Sometimes I'd stay past my shift, just sitting in the stacks with a textbook open, not really reading. It was the closest I could get to the kind of silence I grew up with. I didn't have close friends. I had classmates I nodded at. I had a couple of people I grabbed coffee with once or twice, but the conversations always felt thin, like we were performing the idea of connection instead of actually having it. I'd go home to my tiny apartment and feel the city pressing in through the windows. Cars, voices from the street, someone else's music. I started sleeping with earplugs just to create a little pocket of quiet. Even then, my mind wouldn't settle. What I wanted most was simple, to feel like I belonged somewhere again. Not in a big, exciting way, just present, visible, real to other people without having to invent a version of myself that fit better. The fear that sat under everything was that I'd dissolve into the noise, become another face on the tram, another body in the library, someone who could disappear and no one would notice for weeks. That feeling got heavier the longer I stayed in the city. The island version of me, the one who could sit on a rock for 3 hours and feel complete, felt further away every year. I kept telling myself the biology degree would lead somewhere quieter. Fieldwork, remote stations, something with fewer people and more sky. But the truth was, I was already starting to fade a little. Not in a dramatic collapse way, more like a slow dimming. I'd skip social things without telling anyone. I'd spend whole weekends inside. The library job became the main structure of my days. Clock in, shelve books, clock out, walk home in the dark. It looked ordinary from the outside. Inside, I was starting to feel like I was watching my own life through glass. That's where I was at 24, still studying, still working nights, still carrying this quiet ache for a place that no longer existed. I didn't know yet how far that ache would push me. I just knew the silence I'd grown up with had turned into something else in the city, something emptier, and I was getting tired of feeling invisible inside it. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It came in small pieces that stacked up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. My student loans were climbing faster than I expected. Rent in Oslo kept going up, and the library job barely covered food and the tram. I'd stand in the grocery store calculating whether I could afford the good yogurt or if I had to stick with the cheap stuff again. Little decisions like that started to feel heavier than they should. I'd get back to my apartment after a night shift, drop my bag, and just sit on the edge of the bed for a while without taking my coat off. Too tired to cook, too wired to sleep. Classes got harder to focus on. I'd show up with my notes half finished because I'd been shelving books until midnight. One professor pulled me aside after a midterm and said my work was slipping. Not failing, just not what it used to be. I nodded and said I'd catch up, walked out feeling like I'd already started disappointing the version of myself that was supposed to be good at this. Biology had felt like a bridge back to something real. Now it just felt like another set of expectations I was failing quietly. Sleep became this messy, unreliable thing. I'd lie awake listening to the building settle, the neighbor's TV through the wall, someone laughing on the street below. The earplugs stopped helping. Some mornings, I'd wake up more exhausted than when I went to bed. Coffee stopped working the way it used to. I'd drink it anyway, out of habit, and feel the acid in my stomach. I tried reaching out a couple of times. Texted a girl from my program about studying together. She said yes, then canceled. Happened twice. After that, I stopped asking. It was easier not to get my hopes up. My parents were on the mainland still, dealing with my mom's ongoing health stuff. Phone calls with them were short, practical. How's school? How's the job? Fine, fine. I never told them how thin everything felt. They had enough on their plates. There was this one weekend where the loneliness got so loud I almost called the old fisherman from the island. I still had his number written in an old notebook. I sat with my phone in my hand for 20 minutes and never dialed. What was I going to say? That the city was swallowing me? That I missed sitting in a boat not talking? It felt pathetic even to think it. Money got tighter. I started skipping the heating some nights to keep the bill down. Wore 2 sweaters and stayed under the blanket. My body started carrying the stress in small ways. Tight shoulders, headaches that lasted days, this constant low-level dread when my phone buzzed because it might be another notice about a payment. I wasn't in crisis. Not yet. But I could feel the edges fraying. The worst part was how ordinary it all looked from the outside. I still went to class, still showed up for my shifts, still answered, "I'm good," when anyone asked. Inside, though, I was starting to feel like I was holding a door closed against something heavy, and the door was getting heavier every week. I didn't have a plan. I just kept going, hoping something would ease up. It didn't. I tried everything else first. That's the part people don't always understand. It wasn't like I woke up one day and decided to cross some line. I was still looking for normal ways out. I applied for extra shifts at the library. They didn't have any. I looked at tutoring jobs, cafe work, anything that paid a little more and didn't require me to smile at strangers for 8 hours. Most places wanted experience I didn't have or availability I couldn't give because of classes. I even thought about dropping down to part-time studies so I could work more, but the student loan people made it clear that would mess with my funding. So I stayed stuck. There was one afternoon I almost called student counseling. I had the number saved, sat on my bed staring at it. Then I pictured sitting across from some calm stranger, trying to explain that I felt like I was disappearing and that the city noise was eating me alive. It felt too big and too small at the same time. I put the phone down. Money kept getting tighter. One week, I had to choose between paying the electric bill on time or buying groceries that would last more than 3 days. I chose the bill and lived on rice and whatever was left in the cupboard. My body felt heavy all the time. I'd catch my reflection in the tram window and barely recognize the girl looking back, pale, tired, eyes a little too empty. The loneliness got sharper. Not the soft kind from the island. This was the kind that sat on your chest at 2 in the morning and refused to move. I'd lie there thinking about how long it had been since anyone had really looked at me. Not glanced, looked, touched my arm, asked a question they actually wanted the answer to. The silence I used to love had turned into something that felt like erasure. I started going out sometimes after my shifts. Not clubs, just late-night cafes or the occasional quiet bar near campus. Mostly, I sat alone. One night, a man struck up a conversation. Older than me, calm, well-dressed. He didn't push, just talked about the city, about how easy it is to feel invisible here. Somehow, he got me talking more than I'd talked to anyone in months. When he mentioned that some people arranged private meetings, no strings, no expectations, just company, I almost laughed it off. Almost. I went home and told myself it was ridiculous, dangerous, not me. I spent days arguing with the idea in my head. Pride kept saying I was better than that. Fear kept listing everything that could go wrong. Shame made my face hot even thinking about it. But underneath all of that was this desperate little hope that maybe intense contact, real, physical, undeniable presence, could cut through the numbness. That maybe if someone actually saw me, even for an hour, I'd feel solid again. I tried one more round of normal solutions. Messaged an old classmate. No reply. Walked around the harbor for hours, hoping the water would steady me the way it used to. It didn't. Came home to another past due notice on the mat. The next time I saw him, he was straightforward. No pressure, just an offer. Meetings without obligations. I could say no at any point. I sat there with my coffee going cold, heart beating too hard, and heard myself say the word before I fully decided to. Yes. I took the tram across town that night. The address he'd given me was in a quiet residential area, not far from the university, but far enough that I didn't know the streets. I got off 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way, mostly so I'd have time to turn around if I wanted to. My hands were cold, even though it wasn't freezing. I kept checking the number on my phone against the buildings. It was a regular apartment block, 4 stories, light brick, the kind of place where people had bikes locked in the courtyard and plants in the windows. Nothing flashy. I buzzed the code he sent. The door clicked open. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. Felt less trapped that way. He opened the door on the 3rd floor. Same calm face as the bar. He smiled like this was normal and stepped aside so I could come in. The apartment was clean, almost sparse. Light wood floors, a low sofa, a kitchen visible from the entry. No personal photos. It smelled faintly of coffee. He took my coat and hung it up, asked if I wanted water. I said yes, just to have something to do with my hands. We sat on the sofa with a bit of space between us. He explained things in a straightforward way. This was just time together, no pressure. I could leave whenever. He mentioned the amount that would be left on the table afterward, like it was a practical detail, not the point. I nodded. My voice felt thin when I answered. What surprised me was how ordinary the conversation stayed at first. He asked about my studies. I told him about the library shifts. He listened without interrupting much. There were long silences where the only sound was the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I kept noticing small things, the way the lamp cast a soft circle on the floor, the fact that his watch was expensive but not flashy, how he didn't fill every quiet moment with talk. At some point, he stood up and held out his hand. Not demanding, just offering. I took it. We moved to the other room. The light was lower in there. I remember the weight of the door closing behind us and the sudden awareness of how far I was from anything familiar. I won't go into the details of what happened next. It was physical, closer than I'd been to anyone in a long time, There were moments of awkwardness, my hands not knowing where to rest, his questions checking if I was okay, the strange mix of being seen and still feeling separate. When it was over, we lay there for a few minutes without speaking. The room felt different, heavier somehow. He got up first, brought me a glass of water and my clothes. On the table by the door, there was an envelope. He didn't make a show of it, just said it was there if I wanted it. I picked it up without counting. My fingers felt clumsy putting my coat back on. He walked me to the door and said I could message him if I wanted to meet again. No hard sell. I said okay and left. Outside, the air hit colder than I expected. I walked to the nearest tram stop instead of calling a car. Sat in the back seat with the envelope in my pocket. The city light slid past the window. Something had shifted. Not in a big, dramatic way. More like a door I hadn't known was there had opened, and I already knew I was going to walk through it again. The money showed up fast. Within a month, I'd paid off the worst of the student debt and stopped calculating yogurt prices at the store. I bought a decent winter coat that didn't let the wind through, then better boots, then a nicer apartment closer to the water, still small, but with actual heat I didn't have to ration. Clients started sending cars instead of me taking the tram. One man flew me to Bergen for a weekend just to walk the harbor and eat at a place where the menu didn't list prices. Another put me up in a hotel in Stockholm with a view of the water that looked almost like home. Business class seats became normal. I stopped being surprised by the warm towels and the way the flight attendants called me by name. Gifts arrived without much comment. Scarves, a watch I was almost afraid to wear, an envelope with cash for incidentals. I bought clothes that fit properly, the kind that made me look like I belonged in the rooms I was now walking into. Exclusive dinners, private events where everyone spoke softly and no one asked what I did. I overheard pieces of conversations about mergers, about politicians, about money moving in ways that never made the news. People told me things they probably shouldn't have, the way you tell a stranger on a plane because you'll never see them again. There were strange requests that had nothing to do with the physical side. Sit in the hotel suite for 3 hours and just listen while a man practiced a speech. Attend a gallery opening as someone's quiet companion and not speak unless spoken to. One client drove me 2 hours out of the city to an empty summer house, made me tea, and talked about his dead brother until the sun went down. No touch, just presence. Those nights felt almost like the contact I'd been chasing. Every week, I crossed another small line without marking it. Stayed later than I planned. Accepted a trip I would have refused no to a month earlier. Learned the rules without anyone writing them down. Never asked too many questions. Never looked too interested in the names. Leave when the energy shifted. It started feeling normal. The library job faded. Classes became something I half attended. My old apartment, the one with the thin walls and the past due notices, already felt like someone else's life. I remember standing in a hotel bathroom in Copenhagen, looking at myself in a dress that cost more than my old monthly rent, and thinking, I can't believe this is my life now. The thought came with a little rush, then quieter, a flicker of unease I didn't examine. The emptiness I'd felt in the city was still there, but it was covered over with motion and attention and the solid weight of cash in my account. Leaving would have meant going back to the silence and the invisibility. Staying felt like the only direction that still had air in it. At some point, the two lives stopped feeling separate. This was just my life. It didn't happen in one night. It stretched out over months, then years, until the person who used to shelve books in the library felt like someone I'd only heard about. Clients got more specific. The easy ones, the dinners, the quiet listening, started mixing with people who wanted more control over the time. One man booked me for an entire weekend at a cabin outside the city. Nothing extreme, just isolation. He wanted silence. I sat in a chair by the window for hours while he worked on his laptop. The only sound was the wind. When he finally spoke, it was to say I reminded him of something wild that didn't belong indoors. I laughed it off. Later, I realized I'd stopped finding that kind of comment strange. I got good at reading people in the first 30 seconds. The ones who talked too much were usually lonely. The quiet ones were harder. I learned to match their energy, to laugh at the right moments, to ask questions that made them feel interesting. Pretending got easier. Sometimes I forgot I was pretending until I was on the tram home, and my face felt tired from holding the expression. Names became fluid. I had 3 or 4 I rotated depending on the client. One for the older businessmen, one for the ones who wanted someone younger sounding, one that felt closer to my real self for the rare nights that stayed soft. I stopped correcting people when they got it wrong. It was simpler. My real life shrank. I stopped answering group messages from the few university acquaintances I still had. Missed a classmate's birthday dinner and sent a vague excuse about family. Then another. Holidays blurred. One Christmas I spent in a hotel in Trondheim because a client had meetings there and wanted company in the evenings. I told my parents I was visiting a friend. The lie came out smooth. I deleted the messages afterward out of habit. Sleep flipped. Days became for recovering. I'd draw the curtains and stay in bed until the light started fading. Nights were for work or waiting for work. I carried cash in different places, inside a book, taped under a drawer, because banks ask questions if too much moved at once. I started checking the exits in every hotel room without thinking about it. Left, right, windows, stairs. It was just what you did. Some clients were kind in their way. One older man only ever wanted to walk along the waterfront and talk about birds. He never touched me, paid well and sent me home early. Those nights felt almost safe. Others were harder to place. A man who made me wait in the bathroom for 20 minutes while he finished a call, then acted like nothing had happened. Another who insisted I wear a specific dress he'd bought and then spent the evening correcting how I sat. Nothing violent, just the slow pressure of someone else's rules settling over the night. Luxury stopped registering. The first time a suite with a view of the fjord had taken my breath away. Later, I walked into places like that and mostly noticed the minibar prices and whether the shower had good pressure. Exclusive events became background noise. I overheard deals, complaints about wives, stories about money that never touched regular people. I stopped being surprised. Secrets felt ordinary. I made excuses for things that would have stopped me cold at the beginning. A client who wanted me to stay completely silent the entire time. I told myself it was just a preference. Another who drove us further out of the city than I'd agreed to and kept the doors locked until he was ready to leave. I filed it under boundary testing and charged more next time. The discomfort stayed, but it moved to the background, like a radio left on in another room. Friendships faded completely. The last person from school who still checked in got a short reply and then silence from me. It was easier. Explaining anything felt impossible. My parents still thought I was finishing my degree and working extra shifts. The distance between that story and the truth got wider every month. I forgot what a normal Tuesday felt like. Days of the week lost their shape. I'd look at my phone and need a second to remember whether it was Wednesday or Saturday. Relief hit sometimes when a booking canceled at the last minute. Not because I didn't need the money, but because the idea of performing for another stretch of hours felt heavy. Then the quiet would settle in and I'd start refreshing my messages again. One night, I caught up into a mirror in a hotel bathroom and didn't immediately recognize the expression on my face. Calm, closed, ready. The girl who used to sit on the rocks for hours was still in there somewhere, but she felt far away, like a story someone else had told me. By then, this life didn't feel temporary anymore. It just felt like the only one I had. The booking looked ordinary on the surface. A weekend at a remote place along the coast. The client had been polite in messages, said he wanted quiet, something away from the city. I'd done versions of this before. Cabins, empty summer houses, long drives where the conversation stayed light until it didn't. I told myself the usual things. I could leave if it felt wrong. I always had before. We left in the late afternoon, 2 of them this time, the main client and a friend he introduced as someone who just needed the air. The car was nice, the road got narrower, the houses farther apart. They talked about work, about the weather turning colder. I watched the trees thicken outside the window and felt that familiar, low unease I had learned to push down. The kind that says the plan has already shifted and you're the last to know. The place turned out to be an old lighthouse, abandoned, standing alone on a stretch of rock above the water. No heat, broken windows covered with plastic that flapped in the wind. They said it was temporary, just for the night, a different kind of quiet. I remember the smell of damp wood and salt, the way their voices changed once the car doors closed behind us. Less careful, more certain. I ignored the first signs, the way they locked the outer door, the way one of them laughed when I asked about the return trip, the cold that settled in fast once the sun dropped. They left me there with almost nothing, said they'd be back in the morning. The wind came straight off the water. I tried to keep moving at first, walked the small rooms, counted the hours by how dark it got. Then the shaking started and wouldn't stop. I don't remember all of the next stretch clearly, just the cold working its way into my bones, the sound of the plastic sheeting tearing in the gusts, the slow understanding that no one was coming back when they said they would. Time stopped meaning anything. My thoughts got simpler. Stay awake. Keep blood moving. Don't lie down too long. Tourists found me, a couple hiking the coastal path who saw the broken plastic and heard something. They got me out, wrapped me in their jackets, called for help. The ambulance ride is a blur of voices and bright lights and someone asking my name over and over. I gave them one of the fake ones first. Habit. In the hospital, the nurses moved around me like this was any other hypothermia case. Warm blankets, monitors, questions about how long I'd been out there. I gave short answers. The world outside the window kept going. Cars, people walking past with coffee, a radio somewhere playing music. No one in that hallway knew what the night had actually been. A doctor came in later, a woman, calm, who didn't push too hard at first. She sat down instead of standing over the bed, asked a few practical things, then waited. Something in the way she looked at me made the usual story stick in my throat. For the first time, I couldn't make the experiment version sound true, even to myself. That was the moment the illusion cracked for good. I wasn't testing boundaries or chasing contact anymore. I had been left like something disposable, used up and set aside. Continuing would mean pretending I still had control when every piece of evidence said otherwise. I knew then I couldn't go back to that life, not after this. Leaving didn't happen cleanly. I tried twice before it stuck. The first time, I blocked numbers and told myself I was done. Within a week, the messages started again. Polite at first, then colder. Someone knew my real name. Someone mentioned the hospital. I changed my number, moved to a smaller place on the other side of the city. Still wasn't far enough. Money ran out faster than I expected. The cash I'd saved felt dirty and also necessary. I took a job restocking shelves at a bookstore because it was quiet and no one asked questions. The first week, I had a panic attack in the stockroom when a customer's voice sounded too much like one of the men from the Lighthouse. I sat on the floor between boxes until my hands stopped shaking. The manager found me and just brought water. Didn't push. Therapy started because the hospital psychiatrist wouldn't let it drop. She specialized in trauma. She didn't flinch when I finally told her pieces of it. Sessions were slow. Some days I talked. Some days I stared at the floor. Nightmares came in cycles. Cold, plastic sheeting, the sound of a car driving away. I'd wake up checking the locks even though I lived alone. Guilt sat heavier than the fear some nights. Shame, too. I kept replaying the early choices, the nights I told myself it was still an experiment. I missed the money in practical ways. Ordinary life was expensive and slow. No more cars waiting, no more envelopes, just budgets and secondhand clothes again. I lost the last thin connections from the old world without meaning to. People who only knew the version of me that showed up polished and available simply stopped existing in my phone. There was pressure. Not dramatic chases, quieter things. An old client who found my new number through someone else and sent a message that said he hoped I was feeling better. An acquaintance who hinted that stories travel. I deleted accounts, stopped going to the places I used to. The fear of being recognized on the street never fully left, but it got quieter. The hardest part was the inside work, learning how to sit in a room with another person without performing, learning that silence didn't have to mean danger or emptiness. Trust came in tiny pieces, the psychiatrist, then a coworker at the museum who never asked why I flinched at sudden loud sounds, then the water itself. I work now in a small natural history museum, mostly behind the scenes, cataloging, cleaning specimens, keeping the bird collections in order. It suits me. The public areas stay busy, but the back rooms are quiet. I live alone. I don't go out much. Most weekends I take the train to the coast and sit by the water for hours. Same rocks, different shoreline. The cold still bothers my joints. The hypothermia left marks that don't fully fade. Some things healed enough to live with. The constant alertness eased. The automatic lying mostly stopped. Other things stay don't. I still can't fully forgive myself for handing my silence and my need to people who only knew how to use it. I wanted to feel human contact again. What I got back was a deeper kind of empty. I'm 32. I don't tell this story often. When I do, I don't dress it up. I just say what happened and what it cost. The girl who used to sit on the island rocks is still in here, quieter now, more careful with who she lets near the quiet. Some days that's enough. Some days it isn't. I wanted to feel people. They used me and sent me back emptier than I started.